Check, 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 check. Right, neat. Good morning. Today is Monday, March 4th, 2024. My name is Ken, and you're listening to Astigmatic Radio. This is the show's very first live broadcast, and I do expect everything to go wrong. However, I intend to have a meaningful discussion regardless of the outcome. On today's show, we'll be discussing the following news. The Flower Massacre, how Gaza food killings unfolded and Israel's story changed. Biden approves military airdrops of aid into Gaza. UN rights chief calls for non-discriminatory U.S. election. And lastly, the story behind the New York Times October 7th Exposé. Thanks for joining me, and let's see what happens with these stories. So first of all, we're going to talk about the Flower Massacre, and if you haven't heard about this, let me quickly go through a little summary of the events that constitute this event. So the Flower Massacre refers to a situation that happened not that long ago on February 29th, 2024, where over 100 Palestinians were killed and over 750 were wounded as they waited to collect food from an aid caravan. The incident unfolded when a crowd gathered at the Harun al-Rashid Street in Gaza, where aid trucks carrying flour were expected, hence the name. According to Palestinian witnesses, Israeli forces opened fire on the crowd, leading to chaos and a stampede. Israeli military initially attributed the incident to a stampede caused by the crowd, but their version changed throughout the day, stating that their troops felt threatened and responded by opening fire. Yeah. The international community, including the UN's chief, Antonio Guterres, condemned the incident with calls for an investigation. So basically, we're talking about a situation where we have a bunch of war-torn civilians gathering around some type of food aid and essentially being killed outright despite no threat fomenting. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch CNN's description of it, and you got to understand when mainstream media covers this stuff, they tend to use insane verbiage. Like, oh, it was chaotic, and ooh, a bunch of people, it was hectic. They tend to completely cover for the IDF. So make no mistake, CNN is going to be a bit apologist with this, but they will describe it. We're actually going to watch another source as well after that. So for now, let's go to CNN.
Eyewitnesses and the Hamas-run Palestinian Ministry of Health say that more than 100 people were killed in what is being described as a chaotic incident as IDF soldiers opened fire as people were trying to get food from aid trucks. CNN's Jeremy Diamond is gathering new details. He's been picking up some new reporting. Jeremy, bring us up to speed here.
Well, first of all, Kate, I think it's important to note that the aid situation, the humanitarian situation in northern Gaza is just so desperate. And that seems to be part of what led to this scene. Hundreds, if not thousands of people surrounding some of these aid trucks that were able to enter northern Gaza. Some of the very few aid trucks that have actually been able to make it in there. And you can see in this video by the from the Israeli military, the crowds of people around these trucks. But what appears to have happened is that the Israeli military opened fire on some of these people who were surrounding these trucks. An Israeli military.
Do you just hear how they describe it as a chaotic event unfolding? It's essentially an army versus civilians. It's a massacre. How is it chaotic? Right? Even the way this guy describes it, like open firing on some civilians, like, bro, 100 plus people died.
Official telling us that the crowd approached the forces in a manner that posed a threat to the troops.
Listen to him.
And they say that those troops then responded with live fire. Now,
okay, so a crowd approaches the troops, and then the troops just kill. Okay.
Eyewitnesses on the scene have told us that Israeli tanks as well as drones opened fire on this crowd. And that following that, there was a chaotic scene. Some of the drivers of these aid trucks apparently tried to get away amid this gunfire and killed several additional people. We are told that...
Okay, so they downplay the idea that Israel's army just droned a crowd, and instead draw attention to the fact that the aid drivers, in their sheer panic and will to survive, peeled out in the trucks and may have run over people as well. This is just absolutely wild coverage.
104 people were killed in this incident, 760 people injured, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. It's not clear yet how many of those were killed by Israeli gunfire versus by these trucks and the ensuing...
No, dude, it's pretty clear. When you talk about using drones against crowds this densely packed, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say we're dealing with probably 90% plus from the drones and the guns instead of the trucks, brother. This dude is pure stenography. This is insanity. I didn't know it was going to be this bad. It's okay. We can pick it apart, though.
Chaos, but our eyewitnesses on the ground indicate that it was the Israeli gunfire that prompted some of those trucks to flee the scene and in the process run over some of these individuals. But we are still working to gather additional details. The Israeli military...
Yeah, he's mentioned like 3 or 4 times now that the trucks may have run over people. Guys, I promise you that any civilians that got harmed or killed by a fleeing aid truck pales in comparison to what live weaponry and drones will do to a crowd of that size.
Says for
this
its
is
part
insane.
That the incident is under review, and they are also saying in a statement that Gazan residents surrounded the trucks, looted the supplies being delivered, and that during the incident, dozens of Gazans, they say, were injured as a result of pushing and trampling.
There you go. So basically, they stampeded themselves. They ruthlessly looted the flower like thugs after the event. They ran over themselves. This is despicable. This guy's reading literal line by line propaganda. This is absolutely despicable.
It was clearly more than just pushing and trampling, and we have eyewitnesses making very clear that the Israeli military did indeed open fire on these individuals as well. Now, we should know...
Well, okay, when you say as well, that's the lead, dude. Talk about burying the lead, saying, okay, yeah, there was a lot of scrambling, and there was trucks fleeing around, people were pushing and shoving, looting. Dude, why were they doing that? Because they were getting shot. You dumb motherfucker.
That this is only happening because of how desperate the humanitarian situation is in northern Gaza. Very few aid trucks have actually been able to make it in there. The World Food Program recently suspended aid.
Yeah, why is it desperate? This is painful. So basically, you know, we're dancing around a lot of things here in this news coverage. I don't know if this guy likes what he's doing or if this is hard for him, but either way, I hate him.
Deliveries to northern Gaza, saying that it was too unsafe. Part of that has to do with a lack of coordination with the Israeli military to get those trucks into a war zone safely in a way that they are not targeted. And it also has to do with the fact that the Israeli military in the past has targeted police officers who have been around those aid convoys. And so there is very little security for these. You combine that lack of security, you combine that with the fact that people are on the brink of famine in northern Gaza, and then the Israeli military also being on the scene.
On the brink. On the brink of famine. Oh boy. CNN, you suck. All right, so basically we're dealing with a situation here, this flower massacre, where we have what seems to be a fairly standard IDF tactic now of basically attacking people that are seeking help from the attacking. It's like telescopic attacking. It's like, okay, so you injure a bunch of people and displace them, and then you wait for them to crowd the hospitals, and then you attack people coming to and from the hospitals, right? You make people unable to fulfill their caloric intake needs and reach starvation, yet you then monitor food intake from aid trucks and then end up creating massacres out of thin air and then blaming the Gazans themselves. It's like, this is crazy. And like, it's so transparent too. It's like, I don't know how this dude can sleep at night doing that. Let's watch Al Jazeera's little clip they put out on it and see if it's a little bit more balanced.
In the early hours of the morning.
It's only in our left ear, apparently. Thank you, Al Jazeera.
Thousands of people flocked to Al Rashid Road, southwest of Gaza City, desperate for aid. Instead, survivors say they walked into a trap. By the time the sun rose, the extent of the horror was clear. The dead and the dying lying side by side, gunned down by Israeli fire.
The Israelis just opened random fire on us, as if it was a trap. Once we approached the aid trucks, the Israeli tanks and warplanes started firing on us. If this continues like this, we do
He's talking about drones, not planes, just to be clear. There's no way he's talking about planes.
not want any aid delivered at all. Every convoy coming means another massacre.
Every convoy coming means another massacre. We don't want aid at all. I mean, Jesus. I hope they don't show anything crazy in here.
Instead of aid, they've come away with the dead.
Yeah. So it's like, this is just...
We are simply administering first aid treatment only.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
His bodies are still alive.
Yeah, so like it's way worse. This isn't a simple scenario of a stampede and a bunch of looters. This is an issue of a legit massacre. I mean, I hope to God that one day incidents like the Flower Massacre here and other ones that were less prolific and less named, I hope to God these things get remembered. I hope that people actually take these things seriously and history books tell these tales of just absolute, insane, depraved murder and genocide. Pretty disgusting stuff, not gonna lie. And really what's the most gross about this is like you'll go to most of the mainstream media and they'll all be pretty apologetic to it. They don't really know how to cover the Israeli massacres. Like they can handle the slow burn of the genocide, of the pushing the Gazans south into Rafah and eventually just dispersing, doing whatever they have to do. They can cover that because it's slow, but they can't handle these. Like, oh my God, you guys just shot 900 Palestinians around a flour truck. Mainstream media is completely unable to handle that. Instead, you'll just get these talking points like, oh, they were forming a stampede, it was chaotic, and it just makes my blood boil. Not gonna lie, disgusting stuff. Truly disgusting stuff. But it needs to be talked about and discussed at the end of the day, regardless. So let's go ahead and move over to another topic here. So, although it is another topic, it is actually related to the previous topic, to be clear here. So, the next headline is, Biden approves military airdrops of aid into Gaza. Now, this is a direct response to the Flower Massacre as far as I understand it, right? So let's just read a little bit here. Very short AP headline, headline-style article. It reads, President Joe Biden says that the U.S. will begin airdropping humanitarian assistance into Gaza a day after more than 100 of Palestinians were killed during a, quote, chaotic encounter with Israeli troops. Make no mistake, it wasn't a chaotic encounter until after the IDF started killing civilians that were trying to collect flowers. So just make no mistake, even the White House is on board with this just insane propaganda, as it makes sense because they're essentially chaperoning the genocide in Palestine in the first place. But let's go ahead and watch what Biden has to say about this. It's still good to hear what the president has to say, just because that's going to be how policy is directed. So let's listen. She said, I hope, when does aid drops to Gaza start? He says, I'm working on it.
I'm not positive. I think very soon.
Are you any dance this weekend, sir?
No.
I thought he was gonna talk about it a little bit, but basically he just says he's gonna get. I mean, airdropping. Let's be clear here, guys. I want to be. I'm not an expert on humanitarian distribution. I have no idea actually the logistics of it, but I do know one thing: that air freight is less efficient, and you're going to be able to get less of it into a war zone than, wait for it, ground freight and sea freight, right? I guess I don't know what the harbor situation is like in the Gaza Strip, but I'm imagining that it's almost entirely going to be aid is almost entirely going to be brought in from semis, from trucks. So the idea of airdropping supply, I mean, it's like laughable what you'd even be able to airdrop. You can't refrigerate it. You cannot do anything with any degree of fragility. Even certain, there'd be certain limitations on what you'd even be able to pack in there. You're basically distributing MREs and, so basically semis are better in every way. So this whole idea of airdropping it is like, what are we doing here? Why not just go from Egypt up and bring a convoy of trucks and get these people the fucking food they need? Like, what do we... Airdropping just seems like a way to give very little aid to Palestinians, but also look like we're doing a lot. It's like an inefficient way to do it, almost by choice. Like, we don't want to piss off Israel by giving these people in Gaza a bunch of extra supplies, but at the same time, we have to do something because Biden is losing the left. It's like, whoa, dude. Absolutely nightmarish stuff, I'm not gonna lie. So what remains to be seen is what actually happens with the Gazans in Rafah. I mean, I metaphorically pray for them every day. I think about these people constantly, and realistically speaking, like, we don't necessarily know, but we all kind of know, like, it's not going to be fun for them no matter what. Airdropping some ready-made meals from the sky is not going to do a whole lot when the IDF literally will surround the parachuted drop and just clap up anybody that comes near it. So yeah, I don't know, Biden. I don't know if this is really the solution here. Maybe the solution would be to get Israel to stop killing them and to stop pushing them and to stop destroying their homes and to stop genociding them, denying them food, denying them water, denying them shore, denying them travel. Maybe that would be the better solution there. Just throwing that out there. But I digress. We all are pretty aware that Biden is feeling the pressure from the left to do something about this, and this ain't it, Chief. So, yeah. All right, so here's a fun one. The UN rights chief calls for non-discriminatory U.S. elections. Now, this is an interesting headline if you're not familiar with UN politics and what the hell this means and why anybody would care. But this isn't the first time that this has been said. I mean, last year alone, Volker Turk, the High Chief, said something extremely similar. We're actually going to watch him say that. But just to sum up what's going on here and why this is kind of important. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, urged the United States on Monday to safeguard the right to vote and ensure that the upcoming presidential election is non-discriminatory. The UN Human Rights Committee had previously expressed concern about state-level practices limiting the right to vote, citing issues such as partisan gerrymandering, restrictions on voting by mail, and stringent voter ID requirements. Turk emphasized the importance of implementing recent recommendations by the UN Human Rights Committee in the face of heightened political polarization. Former President Trump, running for re-election, has perpetuated false claims about the election, and this is what many link to these comments, among other things. Now, we're going to watch real quick a video on what Volker Turk said last year about this issue, and then I don't have a video of him talking about it today. It hasn't been published on the UN channel, but it reads exactly like this, so it's going to be effectively a stand-in. So let's listen to what he had to say about the United States. This was 2023.
It was followed by immediate action to prosecute.
He's in our right ear. What the fuck?
In the United States, people of African descent are reportedly almost 3 times more likely to be killed by police than are white people, under inverted commas. The brutal death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis 2 months ago stood out not just because of the severity of the violence caught on tape, but because it was followed by immediate action to prosecute the officers involved, while generally only a fraction of such cases lead to those responsible being brought to justice. In the US and all other countries, swift and determined action to hold perpetrators accountable in each case should be the rule and not the exception. Structural safeguards must be set up, including independent oversight, effective complaint procedures, and robust legislative reform.
So again, this is 2023, so there's a bit of stuff about more racial issues in his address, but basically this is, we'll get to it, but you can see what we're dealing with here.
But even the strongest actions within law enforcement will not fully succeed unless further concrete steps are taken to address racism and the structures that perpetuate it throughout our societies. Police.
Okay, I actually thought this was another clip, so my apologies on that. But with the Volker Turk, basically, his quote was more or less along here. Let me pull it up real quick, so I don't have to guess. But it's just fascinating, and I wanted to highlight this because if you think about what this is, it's basically the UN saying the US needs to not be a bunch of clown asses. So the quote this time was, "In this electoral year, it is particularly important for authorities at all levels to implement recent recommendations by the UN Human Rights Committee to ensure that suffrage is non-discriminatory, equal, and universal." He's talking about the US, right? Which is interesting to be lectured on elections and democracy by another body as the US, which is funny. I mean, we sure as hell need it, but it is kind of funny to hear that. I wish I could get a quote of that. Maybe next tomorrow I'll show this quote. But he goes on to say, in a context of intense political polarization, it's important to emphasize equal rights and the equal value of every citizen's vote. Yeah, so this is really the thing, is like, in this country, a lot of people don't vote. And whether that's because we have a two-party system, whether it's because people feel disenfranchised, lazy, can't get to the polls, don't care, whatever it is, a lot of people don't vote here. A lot of people are interested in that particular aspect of how we build our government, which is, I suppose, good if your goal is to find a group of highly motivated people that'll vote against their own interests, like, some parties. And if you can find people that want to move forward, sure, but everybody in the middle tends to just not really care so much. So it's just this incredibly depraved game we play here, and we end up dealing with two highly motivated tribes, and they both just go out of their way to stick a metal bar in the other person's bike spokes, essentially, over and over again. It's just this depraved battle of attacking the system and everything in between. And what that results in is a bunch of disenfranchised voters, a bunch of people that feel like they don't have equal value and everything in between. I mean, we're talking about people that are in like a blue stronghold voting. They feel they don't have a say. And every aspect of this is pretty important. And if we're going to do a two-party system like this, I mean, all of the emphasis should be put on getting a higher voter turnout. And the fact that we have an entire party, 50% of our parties, effective parties, basically want a low vote. It's just like there's a broken system here. And to be lectured by UN rights chief, good, sure. It's not going to do anything, but I'll take it. I like it. Okay. So we have one more headline that I want to talk about today. And it's a doozy. So we're obviously not going to go absolutely buck wild on it. But here's what I will do. I'm going to so the headline is "The Story Behind the New York Times October 7th Exposé." And here, I'll just read the blurb here, and then we can watch a couple of videos that kind of describe it. And I don't really have too many, I don't have too much great analysis on it, but it is fascinating and very important to hear, and it's worth throwing in here and at least discussing it briefly. So the summary reads: Annette Schwartz, an Israeli filmmaker and former Air Force intelligence official, collaborated with Adam Sella and Jeffrey Gettleman from the New York Times on an investigation into sexual violence by Hamas on October 7th during the Gaza war. Despite Schwartz's initial reluctance due to lack of expertise, the resulting report titled Screams Without Words, How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence was published in late December and is now being scrutinized as being improperly sourced among other ethics issues. While Schwartz claims the New York Times proposed the investigation, critics argue it reveals poor editorial decision-making. The Times defends the work but distances itself from the initial claim that evidence shows Hamas weaponized sexual violence, now stating there may have been systematic use of sexual assault. Schwartz faces criticism for her social media activity, and a review is ongoing. The central issue remains whether the New York Times presented solid evidence supporting its claim that Hamas deliberately used sexual violence as a weapon of war on October 7th. So less than the actual war, less than the genocide, less than the sexual violence. This is actually a piece that has to do with editorial integrity. So let's toss it over to a quick little video that discusses it. Now, this is The Hill, but let's just see what they have to say real quick.
Are back.
Meanwhile, a new exposé in The Intercept investigates the origins of the now infamous New York Times October 7th sexual violence story. The Intercept's investigation finds that Anat Schwartz, one of the article's authors, admits she was approached by the New York Times to tell the story, not the other way around. When asked if the story was the New York Times' proposal, Schwartz said unequivocally, obviously.
Yeah, that's not a red flag for a publication to be like, hey, we have a story to tell. We need someone to tell it. It's like, okay, are you entertainment or do you have journalists doing journalism?
Of course, the paper stood behind us.
Or are you possibly pushing propaganda?
200%, and gave us the time, the investment, the resources to go in depth with this investigation as much as needed. So this story has really started to explode. Of course, we had the Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal on, and they and Electric Infantata did a lot of the core initial reportings that I think opened up some skepticism about the underlying sourcing of that particular piece, and now The Intercept has done some really important follow-up. So here's why it matters. We covered earlier this week the fact that Schwartz and the other one of the other writers, who was her nephew, did not have any journalism experience, next to no journalism experience, before being apparently recruited to write this front-page New York Times article. And the reason this is so important is because the article made some very specific claims, very substantial claims, that it's now starting to walk back without fully articulating or including all of the evidence that came out in their own investigation. So one of the things that The Intercept reported is that Schwartz attempted to contact every rape crisis hospital and clinic in Israel to substantiate the claims that were made in that New York Times article, and didn't turn up a single victim or complainant of sexual assault in that process. She did not include that.
Yeah, so I've actually heard this story pretty in depth, and the level of journalistic insanity that goes along with publishing this piece is insane. Like, you can follow the breadcrumbs all the way through. In fact, we have the article right here. Here, let me copy this link. Look at this real quick. This is the article. You can follow this all the way through, right? If you'd like, and see what happened. But I can just sum it up for you. We're talking about one of the most well-respected news publications in the world, essentially finding a mercenary to write an article that essentially pushes a narrative. And the problem is, like, that would be okay if the narrative was true, but the problem is the narrative just wasn't true. And there was so much evidence that this person, Schwartz, did not find of this, right? It's like there were so many fake testimonies that she dealt with. There were so many vibes that she was working with. There were so many signs of really people that were in the know telling her that this just was not what she was investigating. It just didn't happen. Like, An example would be sexual violence at the initial festival, right? If you heard about that. There were claims of sexual violence at the festival, but all of the eyewitness testimony involves a nonstop chase and a dispersion. There was no time for it. Like, you'll literally, it's shocking what exactly this person Schwartz found and then still reported, omitting all of the hardships that she had to find the few morsels of sexual assault in that instance that were actually relevant to the article. It's like, sexual assault's awful. All this stuff is awful, but these people were spinning up a horror story that didn't actually happen. So it's just kind of gross stuff. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. I think if you don't know anything about this story, you should actually investigate it. And we'll cover it a little bit more later in the week when I kind of parse what I want to tell about it. I'm still waiting for the New York Times to like completely walk it back and disavow all this before I go crazy about it. But again, first live stream of the show, kind of just chilling and doing our thing. So not really too concerned with the breadth and the depth of the coverage at this point. Really kind of more I want to just talk about while I get used to the format. So either way, we're going to wrap it up. That is all for today, folks. Appreciate you. Of course, right now we're just starting off. Nobody's here, but I guarantee you that if I keep at it and we get better and better and more entertaining, that won't be the case. So just to practice, make sure to like and subscribe all of the videos on this channel that you watch. Helps grow the channel. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.